Let me start by asking you something. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to surrender your entire future, only to discover something completely unexpected on the other side? If you're drawn to tales that touch your soul and linger in your thoughts long after they're over, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. You definitely won't want to miss what unfolds next. There was a time when I believed love would be the foundation of my marriage. I imagined there would be blooms everywhere, perhaps a melody I could softly sing in my mother's kitchen while she hemmed my wedding gown with those gentle, careful hands I knew so well. But that hem was never completed, and there were no blooms. No melody, just an overwhelming quiet. I found myself gazing at the dress she had begun crafting months earlier. The cream-colored fabric drooped listlessly on the weathered wooden hanger near the window. A thin beam of moonlight stretched across the floor of our small bakery, illuminating the intricate lace my mother had sewn with her own hands. I placed my hand against my chest, sensing the anxiety building beneath my ribs. Her gentle humming of that old lullaby Scarborough Fair still echoed in my memory, soft and low, the way she used to sing when I was young. She had never completed that final verse. She always claimed it was meant for tomorrow, but now tomorrow seemed impossible. Not for me, at least. At the bakery's front door groaned open behind me, pulling me back to the harsh, unforgiving present. My father shuffled inside, wearing an expression I had come to fear. His hands shook as he dabbed his face with a stained cloth, avoiding my gaze entirely. Then he appeared. Dominic Blackwood, the man whose name had been whispered throughout our town for years, though I never imagined he would step through our struggling bakery's threshold. He seemed entirely out of place, imposing in his dark charcoal coat, his angular jaw cast in shadows from the dim lighting, his penetrating dark eyes surveying the room as if nothing could possibly capture his interest until they settled on me. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I had heard he was merciless. I had heard he could make grown men twice his age tremble with fear. But standing there, watching him approach like a tempest wrapped in elegance, I realized I had no understanding of what merciless truly meant. He offered no introduction, no polite greeting. Instead, he set a leather portfolio on the counter that separated us. A contract, he stated, his voice deep and uncompromising. 1 year as my wife. In return, your family's debt disappears. My breath caught. My father's face crumpled. He turned toward me, eyes glistening with shame. Please, Bella, he pleaded. There's no other way. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I could only stare at the portfolio that might as well have been a death sentence. Dominic slid a pen across the counter in my direction. The choice is yours, but understand this. Your father signed a promissory note he cannot honor. Without my intervention, he'll lose everything. You'll lose everything. I wanted to cry out. I wanted to flee, but I could sense the burden of my mother's labored breathing from the back room, the gentle beeping of her heart monitor. We couldn't continue running much longer. My hands trembled as I reached for the pen. He watched me, silent, unwavering. I swallowed the knot in my throat and pressed the tip against the paper. My signature appeared foreign and fractured on the page. Dominic leaned closer, his breath grazing my cheek like winter frost. You belong to me now, Isabella Carter. And just like that, I lost myself hours later. After Dominic had departed and my father had collapsed into a heap of guilt and despair on the old sofa, I wandered through the darkened bakery, feeling like a specter. I found myself in my mother's room, where she lay sleeping, her frail chest rising and falling beneath a worn blanket. Her hands, those same hands that had once sewn my clothing, rested folded on her stomach. Something glinted on the nightstand. A small wooden box. I reached for it with fingers that barely felt connected to my body. The lid creaked open to reveal a folded piece of yellowed paper, a letter, worn at the edges, addressed in delicate handwriting I didn't recognize, to Evelyn Carter from Margaret Blackwood. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my heart racing. Margaret? Blackwood, his mother. I unfolded the letter, my eyes scanning the words as if they might ignite if I blinked. My dearest Evelyn, if someday our children's paths should intersect, perhaps they will discover the bravery we never possessed. And there it ended. The ink had faded, the remainder torn cleanly away. I stared at the ragged edge, my mind spinning, with countless questions. What had my mother and Margaret shared? What did she mean by bravery? I pressed the letter against my chest, swallowing the pain in my throat. I had signed my name to a life I hadn't chosen. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to this story than I understood. And I knew I had to uncover it. If you had asked me to envision my wedding day, I might have described golden sunlight streaming through the windows of a small white chapel. Perhaps a quiet gathering of friends and neighbors. My mother standing beside me, smoothing the back of my dress. My father giving me away with tears in his eyes, but pride in his heart. I never imagined this. I stood alone before a towering iron gate, gazing up at Blackwood Manor for the first time. It resembled a fortress more than a home. Gray stone walls stretching toward the sky. Windows darkened like watchful eyes. The air carried scents of rain and cedar, sharp and cold. I shivered beneath my borrowed coat. No one welcomed me at the grand door. No one escorted me inside. I stood in the entryway, clutching the small bag I had packed with trembling hands. Everything I owned fit inside it. Everything that truly mattered had already been left behind. A maid in a crisp black uniform appeared from around the corner, her face expressionless. "Mr. Blackwood is waiting," she said quietly. I followed her through endless corridors of polished wood and marble floors that echoed with every step I took. Portraits of men I didn't recognize lined the walls, Blackwoods, undoubtedly. Men who had built empires, men who had constructed cages. The room where the ceremony would take place wasn't a chapel. It wasn't anything like the warm, familiar space I had pictured all my life. It was a library, massive and cold, with walls of dark mahogany and towering shelves filled with leather-bound books that smelled of dust and distance. At the far end of the room, Dominic stood waiting. He didn't look at me as I entered. He didn't smile. He wore black, naturally a tailored suit that made him appear like a statue carved from night itself. His hands were in his pockets, his jaw set like stone. There were no guests, no flowers. No music, just us and a man in a suit who must have been some kind of officiant. Though no one had bothered to introduce him, I stood across from Dominic, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain it echoed off the walls. The officiant cleared his throat and began reciting the words of vows neither of us believed in. His voice was flat, mechanical, like he had performed this ceremony 1,000 times before and couldn't care less who stood before him now. Dominic's eyes remained fixed on the floor when the man asked if I took Dominic to be my lawfully wedded husband. I could barely force the words from my lips. I do. Dominic's reply was a whisper so quiet I almost missed it. I do. There were no rings, no kiss. The officiant declared us husband and wife and left without another word. And just like that, it was finished. The maid led me to a room on the second floor. It was beautiful in the way museum exhibits are beautiful, untouched, distant, cold. I stood in the center, hugging myself, trying not to cry. Hours passed. No one came. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, I wandered into the hallway. I followed the faintest sound of movement down the corridor, past rooms I was too afraid to enter. I found him in the study, standing by the window, looking out into the rain-soaked night. He didn't turn when I entered. I stood there for what felt like forever before I finally found the courage to speak. Why? I whispered. Why did you do this? His shoulders tensed. For a moment, I thought he might not answer at all. But then, without looking at me, he spoke. Because your father owes me a debt he cannot repay. His voice was colder than the rain outside, and because I could. I felt something crack inside me, something small but sharp. I wanted to scream that I wasn't a debt, that I wasn't a thing. To be claimed because someone could. But the words caught in my throat. He finally turned to face me, his dark eyes unreadable. This is your home now, he said quietly. You will want for nothing. You are free to go wherever you please. He paused. Except back to Portland. My breath hitched. Except back to my family. He turned back to the window, dismissing me without another word. I slept alone that night in a bed far too large for one person, with silence pressed in on me like a second skin. I didn't know whether to cry or scream or run. I woke before dawn, unable to remain in that room a second longer. I wrapped myself in a shawl and padded down the stairs to the kitchen, hoping to find something, anything that felt real. I wasn't expecting to see the housekeeper quietly unpacking a delivery by the back door. She paused when she saw me, then gestured to a basket on the counter. For you, she said simply and left. I approached the basket with shaking hands. Fresh fruit, imported tea, heart medication. There was a note tucked inside, for her heart, DB. I stared at the handwriting, simple and neat. I didn't understand. Dominic hadn't spoken a kind word to me since the day I met him. And yet he had sent this. Tears burned the back of my eyes, but I pushed them back. I didn't know who Dominic Blackwood really was. But I was beginning to realize he was not what he seemed. Began to understand something about silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It had weight. It filled every room in Blackwood Manor, settling into the corners like dust no one dared to disturb. It pressed into my skin until I could feel it in my bones. Dominic had not spoken to me since the night of our wedding. Not a word, not a glance. I saw him sometimes, moving like a shadow down the long halls. He would disappear into his study, his office, or the conference room where men in suits came and went like soldiers reporting to their general. I told myself I should be grateful. He wasn't cruel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch me. But somehow his distance hurt more than anything he could have done. I tried to keep myself busy. I read old books from the library. I walked through the garden alone. I stood by the window for hours, tracing the rain with my fingertips on the glass. But every night, I thought of home. I thought of my mother lying in her small bed in Portland. I thought of her hands, pale and shaking. I thought of the lullaby she used to hum, and I wondered if she could still hear it. Happened late one night. I was walking past the study when I heard his voice, low, rough, like something breaking apart. She doesn't know, Dominic said quietly. There was silence on the other end of the line, just the faint crackle of a voice I couldn't make out. Watched her for years, since she was 13. His voice broke on the last word. I pressed a hand over my mouth to stop the breath that hitched in my throat. She's all I ever wanted. And now she looks at me like I'm a monster. My knees nearly buckled. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I ran down the hall, up the stairs, into my room. I shut the door and pressed my back against it, trying to breathe. Years? Had he been watching me that long? I curled up on the bed, pulling the blanket around me like armor. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the letter I'd found back home, the letter from Margaret Blackwood. I couldn't explain why, but something about it felt like the key to a lock I hadn't dared open. I waited until the house was quiet, then slipped into the library. I searched the shelves until I found an old wooden box marked Family Records. My heart pounded as I opened it, scanning faded papers and brittle envelopes until I found what I didn't know I was looking for. A letter addressed to Margaret Blackwood, written in handwriting I recognized instantly, my mother's. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Dear Margaret, I've never had the courage to tell you how much your friendship meant to me. When I met your family, I thought maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as cruel as I feared. But your father made it clear I wasn't good enough. We weren't good enough, so I left. I married George and I never looked back. But sometimes I wonder if our children meet one day, will they carry the kindness we couldn't? No blood binds them, no history they need to bear. Just a chance to be better than us. I clutched the letter to my chest, tears welling in my eyes. Dominic wasn't some dark thread tangled in my family's past. We were not bound by anything but choice, and somehow that terrified me even more. That evening, I stood outside his study for a long time. I raised my hand to knock and let it fall to my side again. I wanted to ask him. I wanted to hear it from him. But my heart wasn't ready. I turned to leave. That night, I dreamed of the bakery, of my mother's hands folding dough on the wooden counter, of the soft hum of her voice filling the kitchen, of the way she used to tell me, love isn't something you take, Bella. It's something you give when you're ready to be brave. When I woke, I knew I couldn't keep running from this. I had to face him. I had to face myself. And maybe, just maybe, find out if there was still a heart beneath all that silence. The house felt heavier that morning, like the walls had drawn closer overnight, like the air had thickened somehow. I didn't bother with breakfast. I couldn't have swallowed a thing even if I'd tried. I stood outside Dominic's study again for the third time in 2 days. But this time, I didn't turn away. I lifted my hand, knuckles brushing against the wood, and I knocked up no answer. I waited, heart pounding. I counted to 10, to 20. Still nothing. I tried again. Still silence. I pressed my ear to the door, heard movement, just a faint rustle, like someone shifting in their chair. I knew he was in there. I almost left. Almost convinced myself I had imagined everything. But before I could move, the door opened slowly without warning. Dominic stood there. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up, his tie hanging loose around his neck. And for the first time, he didn't look like a stranger carved from stone. He just looked tired. He didn't speak. He didn't step aside, but he didn't close the door either. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to steady. Can we talk? His jaw flexed, but he nodded once and moved back to let me in. The room was warm, the curtains drawn tight against the late morning light. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting long shadows across the floor. Dominic walked to the far end of the room and leaned against the edge of the massive oak desk. His arms crossed over his chest. I stood in the center of the room, hands shaking at my sides. I read the letter, I whispered. His eyes darkened like a storm had just rolled in behind them. I know there's no blood between us, I continued, my voice catching. I know about our mothers. He looked away, his jaw tightening. I heard what you said on the phone, I added, quieter still. About watching me. His whole body stiffened. I waited for him to speak. I waited for the walls to come back up, for the coldness to settle in again. But instead, he laughed, not loud, not bitter, just hollow. You were 13, he said finally, his voice low and raw. I saw you fall off your bike in front of that bakery. Your mother came running out, and you laughed. You got up and laughed. Like it didn't hurt at all. I swallowed, remembering the moment like it happened just yesterday. I was there on business with my father, he continued, staring down at the floor. He didn't know I'd gone to look around. I wasn't supposed to be there. He ran a hand through his hair, something cracking in his expression. I never forgot the way you smiled, like the world couldn't touch you. I felt something twist deep inside me. And when your father came to me about the debt, his voice broke. I thought it was fate. I told myself I was saving you, but I wasn't, was I? He finally lifted his head, his eyes finding mine. I trapped you. My throat burned. My heart felt like it might split in two. I crossed the room slowly until there was barely an inch between us. I don't know what this is, I whispered. I don't know what we're doing, but I can't keep pretending I'm not here. I reached out before I could stop myself, my fingers brushing against his. He flinched like I burned him, but he didn't pull away. His breath hitched. His hands uncrossed slowly, cautiously, like he wasn't sure if touching me would undo him. When his palm finally closed around mine, my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't some sweeping declaration. It was barely more than a touch, but it changed everything. We stood there, fingers trembling in each other's grasp, like two people standing on opposite sides of a cliff, reaching for something they couldn't quite name. I don't hate you, I whispered. His breath shuddered out of him like I'd knocked the air from his lungs. Bella. My name in his voice felt like something fragile and holy. I'm still afraid, I admitted, my throat tight. I don't know how to do this. His fingers tightened around mine, just enough to make me feel the weight of his touch. Neither do I, he breathed. But I want to try. For the first time since I had walked into this house, the silence didn't feel like it was crushing me. It felt full of something that scared me more than the emptiness ever had. Hoped we stayed like that until the fire burned low. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. And for the first time since I signed that contract, I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, I had signed my name to something more than a debt. Maybe I had signed my name to a beginning I hadn't dared to hope for. I didn't expect things to change overnight. And they didn't. Dominic didn't suddenly start filling the halls with warmth or laughter. He didn't take me by the hand in front of the staff or sit beside me at breakfast like some storybook husband, but something between us had shifted subtle, fragile, and real. We started seeing each other. Not just passing by like strangers, but truly seeing. Some mornings I'd find him already in the kitchen before the staff arrived, standing by the window with a mug of black coffee in his hand. He never said much, but he didn't walk away anymore. And that felt like something I could hold on to. One evening, I asked to visit Portland. I expected him to say no, expected that wall to come back up. Instead, he surprised me again. He nodded. Take the car, he said softly. Stay as long as you need. He didn't offer to come with me, and I didn't ask. But when I turned to leave the room, I heard him whisper behind me, so faint I almost missed it. Tell her I hope she's well. I hadn't realized how much I missed the smell of flour and sugar until I walked back into the bakery. The air smelled like home-like vanilla and yeast and something older, something softer. My mother was sitting at the little table by the window, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, and for a moment, I felt 12 years old again. Running into her arms after a long day at school, I dropped to my knees beside her chair, clutching her, fragile hands in mine. I missed you, Mama, I whispered. She cupped my cheek, her touch shaking but warm. I missed you more, my sweet girl. We talked for hours that night about the bakery, about the past, about Margaret Blackwood. She told me things I'd never known before. Margaret and we were like sisters once, she said softly, staring out the window as rain began to fall. She dreamed of leaving this life behind, of building something bigger, something brighter. She used to talk about it all the time, the life she wanted for her children. I swallowed hard. She loved your father once, my mother added, her voice small. But nothing ever happened, she continued quickly, her eyes meeting mine. They were just two young people who wanted something they couldn't have. That's all. I nodded, the weight in my chest easing just a little. I never knew, I whispered to my mother smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Some things aren't meant to be known too soon, she said softly. Sometimes the heart needs to learn how to carry them first. The next morning, I noticed something strange. The bills on the counter were gone, and in their place, a paid in full receipt from the medical supply company. I turned to my mother. Confused, she shrugged. A man stopped by while you were sleeping, she said. Said he was settling an old promise. I felt my knees weaken. Dominic. I returned to Blackwood Manor that night, my heart heavier than I expected. I found him in the same place, his study, leaning against that desk like he was holding up the weight of the world. I didn't knock this time. I walked straight in. You paid the medical debt? I said quietly. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me with those dark eyes, unreadable as ever. You didn't have to do that, I whispered, tears threatening to rise. His jaw clenched. His voice came low and rough. I didn't do it because I had to. I took a step closer. I did it because I wanted to. The air shifted again, thick with something. Fragile and real. I crossed the room, stopping just short of touching him. Why? I breathed. He looked down, shaking his head like the answer was too much to bear. Because I can't stand to watch you carry this alone, he said softly. He reached out slowly, like he was afraid I might pull away, but I didn't. I took his hand in both of mine, holding it tight against my chest. For the first time since our wedding, I felt like a wife. Not because of a contract, not because of a debt, but because somewhere along the way, I had started to choose him. For days after that night, the air between us stayed warmer. Not bright, not easy, but something gentler, something closer. Dominic didn't speak much, but when he did, his voice was softer. His eyes lingered longer. Sometimes I caught him looking at me like I was something he wasn't sure how to hold without breaking. I let myself believe that maybe we were learning how to build something real. Until the call came, I was walking through the hallway, tracing the edge of the banister with my fingers when I heard him just around the corner in his office. His voice was sharper this time, tense. No, George, Dominic hissed. I told you this was the last time. I stepped cold. My father's name on his lips felt like ice water down my back. There was a pause. Then Dominic's voice again, lower, darker. You're lucky I'm keeping this quiet, but I swear to God, if you drag her into this again. He didn't finish. He slammed the phone down. I stood frozen, my heart thudding so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. Dragging me into what again? I didn't wait. I pushed the door open without knocking. Dominic turned, startled. Isabella, what did you mean? I snapped, my voice shaking. What are you keeping quiet? He swallowed, pushing a hand through his. Hair, it's nothing for you to worry about. Don't lie to me. My voice cracked, but I stood my ground. Not again. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the fight left his shoulders all at once. Your father, he muttered, took out another loan against your mother's medical care, against the bakery. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. No, I whispered, shaking my head. No, he wouldn't. He did, Dominic said, cutting me off. His voice was flat, defeated. And I covered it, my legs almost gave out. I clutched the edge of the door frame to stay standing. You paid it? I choked. Without telling me, he nodded. You're just going to keep fixing everything behind my back? I choked, tears burning hot in my throat. Is that what I am to you? A problem you solve with money? He took a step toward me. It's not like that, isn't it? My voice cracked. You keep me here. You pay for my family's mistakes. You make decisions like I don't get a say in any of it. His jaw tensed. I did it for you. I shook my head, backing away. No, you did it to control me, just like you've done. From the start, he flinched like I'd slapped him. I didn't care. I couldn't care because all I could hear was my father's voice that night in the bakery. Please, Bella, we have no other choice, and Dominic standing there like he'd already won. I turned and fled the room. I packed my bag before the tears could stop. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. Not in this house. Not with him. Not like this. I left the ring on the nightstand, the same place I'd found the basket of medicine. The place where for a brief moment I thought something real had begun. I closed the door behind me and walked away without looking back. The rain started again as the car pulled onto the highway toward Portland. It came down harder than before, blurring the world outside the window until it looked like nothing but shadows and glass. I pressed my forehead to the cool pane, my breath fogging the glass. I had thought I could build something here. I had let myself believe in him and us, but I had been wrong. I had let my heart lead, and now it was shattered. I arrived back at the bakery long after midnight. The windows were dark. The air smelled of old bread and rain. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and stepped inside, closing it quietly behind me. I dropped my bag on the floor and sank to the ground, curling up in the corner like I used to when I was little and scared of thunderstorms. Only this time, no one came to find me. No one whispered lullabies to chase the fear away. I pressed my face to my knees and let the tears fall, muffling my sobs in the folds of my sweater, because this time I had walked away from the only person who had ever truly tried to stay. I didn't sleep. I don't know why I thought I could. I sat on that bakery floor for hours, listening to the storm outside. The old pipes in the walls, ticking with every gust of wind. Memories kept pressing in on me of the night I signed that contract, of the way Dominic had looked at me when I told him I didn't want to be his problem anymore. Part of me had expected him to fight, to follow me down that hallway, to slam the door shut and refuse to let me leave. But he hadn't. He just stood there, silent, watching me walk away. I didn't know which was worse. Morning came slow and gray, pressing through the windows like a sigh. I couldn't bear to turn on the lights. The darkness felt safer, softer somehow. I made tea on instinct. My hands knew the steps, even if my heart didn't. Boil water, steep the leaves, hold the cup close enough to feel the warmth on my skin. But nothing could fill the cold in my chest. I was rinsing the cup when I heard the knock soft, hesitant. I stood frozen, the water still running over my fingers. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, but then it came again. I dried my hands slowly, every movement heavy, as though part of me already knew who it was. I crossed the small kitchen, unlocked the front door, and pulled it open. There he stood, Dominic, soaked to the bone, rain dripping from his hair, his coat clinging to his frame, his shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen before, like the weight he always carried had finally broken him. I couldn't speak. He didn't try to come in, didn't try to close the distance. He just stood there like a man who had nowhere left to go. I didn't know if you'd let me knock, he said, voice raw, barely above a whisper. I gripped the edge of the door, afraid my knees might give way again. Ran a shaking hand through his wet hair, rain still streaking down his face like he didn't even feel it. I've never been good at this, he whispered. Not with words, not with people. I swallowed hard, my throat aching. I thought I could fix everything with contracts, with money. I thought if I controlled enough pieces, I could keep you safe. He took a step forward, then stopped himself. But I didn't keep you safe, did I? His voice cracked on the last word. I just made you feel like you didn't have a choice. The ache in my chest twisted tighter. You didn't stop me from leaving, I whispered. His shoulders slumped like I'd punched the air out of him. Because I didn't think I deserved to stop you. He took another step, slower this time, like he was afraid the ground might split beneath him. I don't deserve you, Bella. He looked down, his voice breaking completely. I never have. I felt my breath catch. The rain was still falling, but I didn't care. I stepped outside, the cold sinking into my skin. I didn't stop until I stood right in front of him. He flinched like he expected me to push him away. I didn't. I reached up, brushing the wet hair from his forehead with shaking fingers. His breath hitched beneath my touch. I'm so tired of running, I whispered, his eyes closed, his jaw trembling. I don't know how to fix this, I breathed, my voice cracking. But I don't want to do it alone. His arms trembled as he reached for me, but when they wrapped around me, they held on like I was the last thing keeping him standing, and I held him back just as tight right there in the rain, in front of the place where it all began. He buried his face in my shoulder, his breath hot and uneven against my skin. I can't live without you, Isabella, he choked, the words falling like glass. Between us, my heart shattered in the best way. I leaned back just enough to meet his eyes. Then stop trying to, I whispered. His hands cupped my face, thumbs trembling as they brushed away the rain or maybe the tears. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. He didn't kiss me. He didn't pull me closer. He just held me there, forehead pressed to mine, like he was memorizing the shape of my breath. We stayed like that for a long time, the rain easing into a soft drizzle. The world felt quieter somehow, like the storm had taken all the noise with it. When he finally spoke again, it was just 3 words, spoken like a promise. Come home with me. And for the first time, it felt like an invitation, not a demand. I nodded, my voice lost somewhere between my throat and my heart. Because the truth was, I had never really left. I had just needed him to come and find me. We didn't speak much on the drive back. It wasn't like before those long stretches of silence that felt like walls closing in. This was quieter, easier, like there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to fear. I kept my hand on his the whole way. He didn't let go once. When we reached Blackwood Manor, it didn't feel as cold as it used to. Maybe it was the way Dominic held the door open for me this time. Or maybe it was the way he watched me walk in, like he still couldn't believe I'd said yes. I stopped in the front hall, staring up at the high ceilings, the chandelier that once made me.